What secret could destroy a man's pride and rebuild a woman's life? Don't look away, because once you hear this, you'll never forget it. The grand ballroom glittered with chandeliers that cast 1,000 reflections across marble floors. It was the kind of night where power wore tuxedos, greed sparkled in diamonds, and betrayal hid behind champagne flutes. The city's elite had gathered for the annual Unity Gala, an event where fortunes were flaunted and reputations were made or destroyed with a single careless whisper. Near the stage stood Daniel Crawford, a man once known for his charm but now infamous for his arrogance. He had built his success on calculated risks and ruthless deals, and tonight he was parading something far more scandalous than his wealth. His mistress, Serena. She was young, radiant, and draped in a dress that seemed designed to mock the very concept of subtlety. Her laughter rang out like shards of glass, each note a reminder that she had won what another woman lost. At Daniel's side, his hand possessively resting on Serena's lower back, he smirked at the crowd. The whispers that rippled through the room only fueled his ego. To him, tonight was not just about money or status. It was about declaring victory in a war no one else knew they were fighting. He wanted the world to see that he had traded his wife, Emily, for someone younger, flashier, and, at least in his mind, better. But arrogance has a way of demanding an audience, and Daniel craved spectacle. So in a circle of investors and socialites, he leaned close to Serena, loud enough for the murmurs to spread, and whispered the words that would soon unravel his carefully constructed world. Don't worry about her. That billionaire is infertile. She'll never give anyone a child. The words were cruel, venom laced with false confidence. He thought he had buried Emily not just socially, but emotionally and biologically. He thought he had stripped her of the one thing society still expected a woman to provide. And as laughter trickled around him, Daniel's smirk widened, convinced he had secured his triumph. But fate has an exquisite sense of timing. Just as Serena's painted lips curved into a victorious smile, the massive oak doors at the entrance creaked open. A hush fell over the ballroom, so sudden that even the orchestra faltered. Heads turned, whispers silenced, and all eyes locked on the sight that would freeze Daniel's smug expression in place. Emily Crawford. The ex-wife he had discarded like yesterday's newspaper now stood framed by the golden light of the chandelier. She was radiant, not broken. Her gown, elegant and tailored to perfection, hugged her figure with the kind of grace that couldn't be bought off a rack. Her hair gleamed like polished silk, her eyes steady and unafraid. But that wasn't what made the crowd gasp. Her hand was entwined with someone else's, someone powerful, someone untouchable. At her side stood Alexander Grant, the reclusive billionaire CEO known for his ironclad business empire and his refusal to ever be photographed with a date. The man the media speculated about endlessly, the man whose wealth made Daniel look like a boy counting pennies. And tonight, Alexander's hand was firmly clasped around Emily's, as if she was the most precious treasure in the room. Daniel's face drained of color, his smugness dissolving into disbelief. He had told the world Emily was barren, useless, and unworthy. But Emily's other hand rested gently on her stomach, the unmistakable curve of pregnancy evident beneath the silk. The whispers began again, louder this time, no longer in Daniel's favor. "She's pregnant," someone murmured near the stage. "With him? With Alexander Grant?" another voice gasped. "Didn't Daniel say?" "Yes, he said she was infertile." The orchestra picked up again, but the music could not drown the tidal wave of scandal crashing over the room. Daniel's mistress stiffened beside him, her victory dissolving into fear as she realized the joke had shifted. The cruel remark that was supposed to humiliate Emily now hung like a noose around Daniel's own neck. Emily took a step forward, her heels clicking against the marble, each sound a drumbeat of defiance. The crowd parted as if commanded by invisible strings, their gazes riveted on the woman they had once pitied. No one saw weakness now. They saw power, they saw resilience, they saw a reckoning about to unfold. Daniel's throat tightened. For a brief second, he tried to recover his swagger, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow. Well, look who decided to crash the party." But Emily didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice or glare with rage. Instead, she smiled, a calm, devastating smile that sent a shiver through the room. She turned to Alexander, and he squeezed her hand, grounding her with his quiet strength. Together, they looked unstoppable. The ballroom held its breath. This was no longer just a gala. This was the stage for a showdown years in the making. Emily's eyes locked on Daniel's, and in that silence the entire room understood one thing. The woman he had discarded was not just back. She was back with vengeance, back with power, and back carrying the very life he swore she would never have. The whispers rose into a storm, and cameras began to flash, capturing every detail of the moment that would dominate headlines by morning. Daniel tried to speak, but his words died in his throat. Across the room, his mistress Serena shifted uncomfortably, her once smug expression melting into panic. The game Daniel thought he had won was no longer his to control. And as Emily took another step closer, the world leaned in, waiting for the blow that everyone knew was coming. And then, Emily opened her mouth to speak. But what she revealed was far more explosive than anyone in that ballroom could have imagined. Before the night of the gala, before the gasps and the flashing cameras, Emily Crawford was simply a woman who had loved too deeply and trusted too blindly. Her story did not begin with silk gowns or billionaire CEOs. It began in the modest suburbs of Chicago, in a neighborhood where the houses leaned a little too close together, and the dreams always seemed one paycheck away from collapsing. Emily grew up the daughter of a schoolteacher and a mechanic. Her childhood was not extravagant, but it was filled with warmth. Sunday dinners around a chipped oak table, laughter over board games, the comfort of knowing her parents' love was steady, even when money was not. She had inherited her mother's patience and her father's stubborn resilience. These qualities would later become both her salvation and her burden. When Emily was 23, freshly graduated with a degree in literature, she met Daniel Crawford. He wasn't yet the arrogant man who sneered at ballrooms and mistresses. Back then, he was ambitious but charming, a junior executive in a finance firm who could make a room laugh with a single quip. He saw Emily at a friend's engagement party, where she stood in the corner in a thrifted dress, balancing a paper plate of cake. Daniel approached her as if she were the only person in the room. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he said with a grin. Emily laughed, embarrassed, and admitted that small talk drained her. Daniel told her he hated it too. For hours they stood in that corner, sharing jokes and dreams, both of them pretending not to notice that the party had moved on without them. By the end of the night, he had convinced her to give him her number. Their courtship was a whirlwind. He brought her flowers, wrote her silly notes, and talked endlessly about their future. He said he wanted a life of grandeur, a penthouse, vacations in Europe, a name that meant something. Emily, practical and grounded, believed she could balance his ambition with her steadiness. She told herself that behind his hunger for success, there was love. That love would be enough. Within 2 years they were married. The wedding wasn't lavish, but to Emily, it felt magical. She wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her figure, and Daniel whispered vows that made her heart believe forever was possible. For a while, it even was. They rented a small apartment, laughed over burned dinners, and dreamed about children who would one day fill their home with noise. But success has a way of mutating love. Daniel's firm promoted him. The promotions turned into bonuses. The bonuses turned into investments. Suddenly, they were living in a luxury condo overlooking the city skyline. Emily should have been happy. Instead, she began to feel like a shadow in her own marriage. Daniel grew sharper, colder. He measured everything in terms of gain and loss, even affection. He wanted Emily to dress a certain way, act a certain way, smile only when appropriate. She tried to please him. She told herself the long hours and the distant eyes were just the price of ambition. She told herself the warmth would return once they had children. But the children never came. Month after month, Emily waited for the news she longed to share. Each negative test felt like a personal failure, a scarlet letter she couldn't erase. Doctors assured her that nothing was wrong, that sometimes these things took time. But Daniel grew impatient. His whispers turned to accusations. Maybe you're not trying hard enough. Maybe you're too fragile. And eventually, the most cutting one of all. Maybe you just weren't meant to be a mother. Still, Emily held on. She cooked his favorite meals, attended his company parties, smiled even when whispers about his friendly relationships with female colleagues reached her ears. She wanted to believe in the man she had married, the man who once shared cake with her in the corner of a party, until the night she found Serena's earring in their bed. It was delicate, gold with a small diamond, nothing like the understated jewelry Emily wore. She confronted Daniel, her voice trembling, and for a moment she expected denial. Instead, he smirked. "Maybe if you were enough, I wouldn't need more." The words broke something inside her. For weeks, she drifted through life in a haze, her body moving but her soul numb. She packed her things quietly, unable to fight anymore. When the divorce papers were signed, Daniel barely looked at her. To him, she was nothing more than a failed investment, a liability he was eager to discard. But Emily carried a secret. 2 weeks after leaving him, after nights of crying alone in a rented apartment, she discovered she was pregnant. She stared at the test in disbelief, tears flooding her eyes. Against all odds, against every cruel word Daniel had thrown at her, life had taken root inside her. Fear battled joy in her chest. Could she raise this child alone? Could she protect it from the man who had already decided she was worthless? She considered hiding away forever, raising her baby quietly, but something inside her, the stubborn resilience of her father, the quiet patience of her mother, whispered that this child deserved more than a life lived in hiding. And fate, once again, had impeccable timing. At a charity event for underprivileged schools, Emily met Alexander Grant. She didn't know who he was at first. He stood quietly at the back of the room, away from the photographers, listening intently as children read poems they had written. He wasn't the kind of billionaire who flaunted his money. He was the kind who built libraries without putting his name on the door. When Emily tripped on her way to the stage, Alexander caught her arm before she could fall. Their eyes met, and for the first time in months, Emily felt safe. She didn't know then how important he would become. She didn't know that the man holding her steady would one day walk with her into the very ballroom where Daniel mocked her existence. She only knew that when she looked into Alexander's eyes, she saw respect. Not pity, not judgment, but respect. And in that moment, something inside her began to heal. What Emily didn't realize was that Alexander already knew exactly who she was and exactly how much she had been wronged. The Unity Gala was not just an event, it was the event. Every year, the city's richest and most influential gathered beneath the soaring chandeliers of the Imperial Hotel. The ballroom was a cathedral of excess, ceilings painted with golden constellations, marble columns imported from Italy, and tables draped in linens so fine they looked like liquid under the light. The scent of roses filled the air, each bouquet arranged by the most sought-after florist in Manhattan. Even the champagne was imported from a private vineyard in France, a vintage unavailable to ordinary people. For the guests, this gala was a stage to prove they belonged at the top of society's pyramid. It was where old money flaunted tradition and new money fought for recognition. Photographers lined the walls like hunters waiting for the perfect shot. Socialites rehearsed their smiles, billionaires rehearsed their deals, and everyone rehearsed their lies. Daniel Crawford thrived in places like this. To him, the gala was an arena, and he was the gladiator striding into battle. He had polished his tuxedo until it gleamed, memorized the details of every investor attending, and chosen his companion with deliberate cruelty. Serena, in a scarlet gown that clung to her like molten fire, was not just a date, she was his weapon. She played her part flawlessly, laughing too loudly, touching his arm at just the right moments, leaning in close when cameras flashed. Every gesture screamed possession. She wanted the world to know Daniel was hers now, that Emily was a discarded relic of the past. The whispers spread quickly. "That's his ex-wife's replacement. She's half her age." "Did you hear he said Emily couldn't give him a child?" Daniel soaked in the attention, oblivious to the storm he had summoned. He wanted humiliation, not just separation. In his mind, destroying Emily's reputation meant destroying her completely. But across the ballroom, something else was happening. The doors opened quietly at first, unnoticed by most. A ripple of silence spread slowly, like a pebble dropped into water. Heads turned, conversations faltered. Even the orchestra seemed to play softer, as if the violins themselves were holding their breath. Emily Crawford stood at the entrance. Her gown shimmered like midnight under the chandeliers, tailored to perfection, elegant but commanding. A diamond bracelet gleamed on her wrist, not ostentatious but powerful in its simplicity. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, catching the light with every step. She was no longer the timid woman who once clutched her husband's arm in nervous silence. She was something else now, something radiant, untouchable. At her side stood Alexander Grant, the elusive billionaire who rarely appeared in public, let alone with a companion, now walked hand in hand with Daniel's discarded wife. His presence was electric. Conversations shifted instantly. Alexander Grant? With her? Is that really Emily? But Daniel said she was. The whispers swelled, colliding into a roar of speculation. Daniel froze mid-laugh, the blood draining from his face. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't prepared for it. The room he thought he commanded was no longer his. It belonged to Emily. Emily's hand rested gently on her stomach, the soft curve of pregnancy unmistakable beneath the silk. The image was devastating. The woman he declared infertile now carried a child, and she was not alone. She had the most powerful ally in the room holding her hand. Photographers surged forward, flashes exploding like fireworks. The spectacle was too perfect. The betrayed wife returning, pregnant, radiant, supported by the billionaire everyone admired but rarely saw. The media would devour this moment, chew it into headlines, and spit it across every screen by morning. But the real audience was not the cameras. It was Daniel. His mistress Serena shifted nervously, her smile faltering. She had come expecting victory. Instead, she found herself reduced to a footnote in a story far bigger than her. She tugged at Daniel's sleeve, whispering something desperate, but he barely heard her. His world was collapsing in front of 1,000 witnesses. Emily stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble, each sound like a verdict being delivered. The crowd parted instinctively, giving her a clear path toward the stage where Daniel stood. Every eye followed her. Every breath seemed to pause. Alexander walked beside her, his hand steady on hers, his gaze fixed on Daniel with the cold certainty of a man who knew he held all the power. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone was enough. Daniel tried to recover, forcing a laugh that cracked under pressure. Well, look who decided to make an entrance. But the words rang hollow, his voice drowned out by the murmurs rising around him. Emily did not answer immediately. Instead, she turned to acknowledge the crowd, her expression calm, almost serene. Her silence was louder than any accusation. The power dynamic had shifted, and everyone knew it. The gala was no longer about wealth or charity. It was about reckoning. Somewhere in the back, a journalist whispered into her phone, already drafting tomorrow's headline. Ex-wife returns pregnant, hand in hand with billionaire CEO. Serena's hand trembled on her clutch. She could feel the crowd's gaze turning sharp, judgmental. She was no longer the star of Daniel's show. She was the distraction, the mistake, the evidence of his downfall. Daniel's jaw tightened. Rage simmered beneath his skin. How dare she? How dare Emily return here, flaunting her pregnancy, flaunting Alexander? He wanted to shout, to tear her down, but the words stuck in his throat. Every insult he had ever thrown at her now threatened to rebound against him. Emily finally spoke, her voice soft but clear, carrying effortlessly across the ballroom. Some stories, she said, her hand tightening around Alexander's, don't end the way you think they will. The crowd erupted in murmurs, the sentence simple but loaded with meaning. Daniel's hands curled into fists at his sides. Serena paled, suddenly aware that this night would not end well for them. The music stopped entirely. The silence was deafening. Emily took another step closer, her eyes never leaving Daniel's. The power in the room was hers now. And just as Daniel opened his mouth to respond, someone unexpected stepped forward from the crowd. Someone holding a secret that would make the entire ballroom explode. Daniel Crawford had always believed the world revolved around him. From his earliest days in business, he discovered that arrogance disguised as confidence could take him further than actual talent. He wasn't the smartest man in the room, but he was often the loudest. And in a city that worshipped bravado, Daniel thrived. But arrogance is fragile. It must be fed constantly, through money, attention, and validation. Tonight, at the Unity Gala, Daniel thought he had prepared a perfect feast. He would flaunt his mistress, Serena, in front of the most powerful people in the city, erasing any lingering sympathy for his ex-wife, Emily. He would paint her as infertile, weak, and irrelevant, while he stood beside youth and beauty, proving he had upgraded. What Daniel never expected was that Emily would return, pregnant and radiant, with Alexander Grant, the one man who could overshadow him without uttering a word. Still, Daniel tried to hold on to his illusion of control. He forced his jaw to relax, adjusted his cufflinks, and plastered a smirk across his face. But beneath the mask, fury boiled. His empire wasn't just his business, it was the perception others had of him. Tonight, that perception was slipping through his fingers. Serena, on the other hand, wasn't nearly as skilled at hiding her emotions. She had lived her entire adult life chasing the next opportunity, the next rich man who could keep her draped in silk and diamonds. When she first met Daniel, he had seemed like the jackpot. Divorced, bitter, but loaded with cash and eager to prove he was still desirable. She had slipped into his life like perfume, sweet, intoxicating, and poisonous. To Serena, Emily was nothing more than a shadow to be mocked. She relished in Daniel's stories of his ex-wife's supposed weakness, laughing when he said Emily couldn't give him children. She wore her youth like armor and her cruelty like jewelry, proud of the role she played in Daniel's betrayal. Now, standing in the spotlight of the ballroom, Serena felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her. The whispers were no longer celebratory. They were sharp, accusing. "That's the mistress? She doesn't look so confident now. He left his wife for her?" The words sliced through her, but she forced her chin higher, gripping Daniel's arm tightly, as though proximity to his power could shield her. Daniel leaned toward her, his voice low but sharp. "Smile. Don't you dare look scared." She obeyed, though her lips trembled. Together, they turned to face Emily and Alexander, who had now advanced halfway across the ballroom. The sight of Alexander, calm, composed, radiating quiet authority, only deepened Daniel's rage. For years, Daniel had clawed his way into circles of influence, desperate to be seen as an equal to men like Alexander. And now Alexander appeared with Emily, the woman Daniel had discarded, holding her, as if she were the most precious jewel in the room. It was unbearable. Daniel stepped forward, forcing a laugh that echoed hollowly through the hall. "Well, isn't this something? My ex-wife shows up, and suddenly she thinks she's the star of the show. Tell me, Emily, did you come here just to embarrass yourself?" Gasps rippled through the audience. The cruelty in his voice was undeniable, but Daniel didn't notice. He was too blinded by the need to win. Emily didn't flinch. Her eyes met his with steady resolve. She didn't need to defend herself, not when her hand rested protectively on her belly and Alexander's presence towered beside her like a shield. Serena seized the moment, adding her venom to the fire. "Oh, Daniel, don't be too hard on her," she purred, her voice dripping with mockery. "It takes courage to show up when everyone knows you can't give a man what he wants. But I suppose every woman deserves a little pity, don't you think?" The words landed like daggers. Several guests gasped openly. One older woman near the front muttered, "Shameless." Another shook her head in disgust. Serena ignored them, convinced that cruelty equaled victory. Emily's lips curved into a small, calm smile, the kind that unnerved Daniel more than any outburst could. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The silence, heavy and deliberate, spoke louder than words. Daniel's anger flared. He wanted her to shout, to cry, to prove she was still the fragile woman he had broken. Instead, she stood tall, radiating dignity, and that terrified him. He raised his voice, desperate to regain control. "This is pathetic, Emily. You can stand there and play whatever role you want, but everyone knows the truth. You're empty. You always were. That billionaire holding your hand doesn't know it yet, but he'll find out soon enough." The room erupted in whispers again, scandalized by his cruelty. Even his staunchest allies shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't confidence anymore. This was desperation, and everyone could see it. Alexander finally spoke, his voice calm but commanding. "Careful, Crawford. The world has a way of exposing liars." The words cut deeper than any insult Daniel had ever received. Spoken not in anger, but in certainty, they echoed through the ballroom with the weight of authority. Daniel's face flushed crimson, his fists clenching at his sides. Serena, sensing her partner's unraveling, tried to redirect attention. She strutted forward, her heels clattering against the marble, and sneered at Emily. "Tell us, darling, how long do you think this charade will last? Men like Alexander don't stay with women like you. They get bored. You'll see. He'll toss you aside, just like Daniel did." Emily's hand tightened gently around Alexander's. For the first time all evening she spoke, not with anger, but with a calm that silenced the room. Some men toss aside diamonds because they can't tell the difference from glass. The audience erupted in murmurs. The statement was elegant, devastating, and impossible to ignore. Serena's face paled, her confidence crumbling, as the truth of Emily's words settled over the room like a storm cloud. Daniel's eyes blazed with fury. His carefully constructed world was slipping, and no amount of bravado could stop it. He opened his mouth to unleash another tirade. But before he could speak, a voice from the back of the room rang out, holding a truth that neither Daniel nor Serena ever wanted revealed. The ballroom air was thick with tension, the kind that presses against your chest and steals your breath. Guests stood frozen, champagne flutes halfway to their lips, as the clash between Daniel, Serena, and Emily played out like a performance no one could have scripted. It was Serena who moved first, seizing the silence as if it were her last weapon. She stepped closer to Emily, her heels clicking like daggers across the marble floor. Her smile was saccharine, but her eyes burned with malice. "You're brave to come here, Emily," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Brave or foolish? Because let's be honest, darling, everyone knows Daniel left you for a reason. You couldn't give him a family. You couldn't even keep his attention. So tell me, what exactly do you think you're doing here? Trying to play pretend with Alexander Grant?" A ripple of gasps tore through the crowd. The cruelty of Serena's words was undeniable, and yet she seemed emboldened by the attention. She raised her chin, basking in the spotlight of scandal, certain the humiliation would destroy Emily once and for all. Daniel smirked beside her, folding his arms as if daring Emily to respond. "Go on," he taunted. "Tell them the truth. Tell them how many years you tried and failed. Tell them how you cried every night, begging for a child that never came. Tell them you're nothing but a burden Alexander will regret." The words hit like a punch to the gut. For a moment, Emily's breath caught in her throat. The memories flooded back. Doctor visits, whispered prayers, lonely nights staring at a single line on a test. The humiliation was real, raw, and impossible to deny. Whispers swept across the room. "Is it true? I heard they tried for years." That poor woman. Emily stood frozen, her hand instinctively tightening over the gentle swell of her belly. For the first time that evening, the weight of Daniel's cruelty threatened to crush her. Alexander leaned toward her, his voice steady, meant only for her ears. "Don't let them take this moment from you. You know the truth, and so will they." His words anchored her. But still, the sting of humiliation burned. Daniel had orchestrated this moment, calculated every word to strip her dignity in front of the world. And it was working, at least for now. Serena pressed on, smelling victory. "You should have stayed in the shadows where you belong. Walking in here, pretending you matter, it's pathetic." She tilted her head, her smile wicked. "You're a washed-up wife playing dress-up, clinging to a man who doesn't know better. Isn't that right?" Laughter rippled from a corner of the room. It was cruel, awkward, but it was enough to fuel Daniel's confidence. He stepped forward, towering over Emily, his voice booming. "This is who she really is," he declared to the crowd. "Weak, broken, infertile. I traded up, and I don't regret it for a second." The humiliation was complete. The crowd, though uncomfortable, could not look away. It was the kind of scandal people whispered about for months, replayed at dinner parties, dissected in tabloids. Daniel and Serena believed they had won. Emily's throat tightened. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give them that satisfaction. She stood still, silent, letting the cruelty hang in the air. And then, something extraordinary happened. From the back of the ballroom, a voice rang out, firm, sharp, and impossible to ignore. "You're wrong." The crowd turned. It was Margaret, a respected philanthropist and longtime supporter of the Unity Gala. She was a woman whose opinion carried weight, whose reputation was untouchable. She stepped forward, her gray hair gleaming under the chandeliers, her eyes locked on Daniel. "I've known Emily for years," Margaret said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "She is stronger than you will ever be. And as for your lies, look around you, Daniel. Do you see her? Do you see the life she carries? She's not barren. She's not broken. She's about to become a mother." Gasps erupted. All eyes swung back to Emily, to her hand resting protectively on her stomach. Whispers turned to exclamations. "She's pregnant?" But he said, "My God, look at her. She's glowing." Daniel's face twisted in shock. For a moment, he looked like a man caught in headlights, desperate and exposed. Serena's eyes widened, her carefully constructed smugness shattering. Emily exhaled slowly. The humiliation that had threatened to drown her moments ago was shifting, unraveling into something else. The truth was visible now, undeniable, embodied in the curve of her belly. Still, Daniel refused to surrender. He laughed bitterly, his voice trembling. "Don't be fools. That's not my child. It can't be. She's lying. She found some way to trick you all." But the words rang hollow. His desperation was too clear. The crowd wasn't convinced. Photographers snapped furiously, capturing every flicker of his unraveling facade. Alexander stepped forward then, his arm wrapping around Emily's shoulders, his presence commanding the room. "No one here needs to be convinced, Crawford. The truth speaks for itself." His gaze was cold, cutting. "You wanted to humiliate her, but all you've done is reveal your own cruelty." The crowd murmured in agreement. Even those who had been entertained by the scandal moments earlier now looked at Daniel with disdain. Serena shifted uncomfortably, her grip on her clutch so tight her knuckles turned white. Emily's heart pounded. For the first time that evening, she felt the tide turning. The humiliation had not destroyed her. It had exposed him. And yet, she knew this was only the beginning. Daniel was a man who thrived on power, and men like him did not go down quietly. He would fight, he would scheme, he would strike back. Emily glanced at Alexander, who gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. She wasn't alone anymore. Whatever storm Daniel unleashed next, she was ready. The ballroom was alive with whispers, the scandal reaching its peak. Everyone waited for the next move, the next revelation. Daniel's jaw clenched. He wasn't finished. Not yet. He leaned toward Serena, whispering something that made her eyes widen with fear. She shook her head, but Daniel's expression hardened. He was preparing something reckless, something dangerous. And just as Serena raised her glass to cover her trembling hands, Daniel stepped toward the microphone on stage, ready to reveal a secret that could shatter everything. The microphone screeched as Daniel stepped onto the stage. The shrill sound made the crowd flinch, but he reveled in the discomfort. For him, chaos was oxygen, and tonight he intended to choke the room with it. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel's voice boomed, dripping with false charm. "It seems my ex-wife wants to parade herself as some kind of miracle. Pregnant, glowing, holding the hand of Alexander Grant. How convenient. But you all deserve to know the truth." Emily's stomach tightened. She had been through countless humiliations before, but there was something terrifying about this moment. The microphone amplified his cruelty, carrying it into every corner of the ballroom, into the ears of every investor, socialite, and journalist present. There would be no undoing whatever he chose to say. Daniel leaned forward, his smirk widening. "This child she carries? It's not mine. It never could be. Do you know why?" He paused, milking the silence. "Because Emily Crawford is a liar. She's always been a liar. She told me she was faithful. She told me she loved me. But behind my back, she was desperate enough to crawl into another man's bed. That's the only reason she's pregnant now." The words hung heavy, poisonous. The crowd gasped, some shaking their heads, others whispering frantically. Photographers clicked their cameras with renewed frenzy. The scandal had doubled in size within a single breath. Emily felt her knees weaken. Her breath caught in her throat as her heart pounded painfully against her ribs. Daniel's accusations were a knife twisting in old wounds. She had always feared he would reduce her to nothing more than gossip, but she had never imagined he would accuse her of betrayal so boldly, so publicly. Serena, emboldened by Daniel's performance, stepped closer to the stage, her voice ringing with mock sympathy. "It's sad, really. She couldn't give him a child, so she had to trap another man. Poor Alexander doesn't know he's been played." She tilted her head, her fake pity slicing deeper than open ridicule. Alexander's face darkened, his jaw tightening, but he remained silent for the moment. His hand squeezed Emily's, trying to anchor her. Still, the whispers stabbed at her from every side. She cheated? With Grant? Was this all a game? Emily's vision blurred. The once glamorous ballroom spun around her, the chandeliers above now harsh and mocking. She had walked into this room with courage, with dignity, believing she could face anything. But Daniel's words had cracked that armor. The humiliation, the shame, it was unbearable. Her chest tightened as tears pricked her eyes. She tried to blink them away, but the weight of the stairs crushed her. For a moment, she wanted to run, to disappear, to hide from the judgment etched on every face. Memories crashed through her mind, every cruel word Daniel had ever thrown at her, every time he told her she was worthless, barren, unloved. The accusations swirled together until she couldn't tell past from present. She staggered back a step, her hand slipping from Alexander's grasp. The crowd gasped softly at the sight. To them, it looked like confirmation of guilt, like she couldn't deny the accusations. The whispers grew louder, sharper. Daniel smirked, satisfied. He raised his glass as if he had won a toast. You see, even she can't defend herself, because she knows it's true. Emily's throat constricted. She opened her mouth, desperate to speak, but no words came. Her voice had abandoned her, strangled by humiliation. For the first time since she entered the ballroom, she looked small, fragile, broken. The tears she had fought so hard to hide spilled down her cheeks. She turned, pressing a trembling hand to her face. The cameras flashed mercilessly, capturing her weakness, her pain, her collapse. Alexander reached for her, but she pulled away, too consumed by shame. She couldn't bear for him to see her like this, not when Daniel's venom had poisoned the air. "Emily," Alexander murmured, his voice steady, but she shook her head. Her heels clicked desperately against the marble as she backed toward the edge of the room. Guests parted like waves, their eyes wide with judgment and curiosity. No one stopped her. No one offered comfort. The room had turned into a coliseum, and she was the spectacle bleeding in the sand. Emily slipped out through a side door, her breath ragged, her chest heaving. The cool night air hit her like ice, but it wasn't enough to calm the storm inside her. She stumbled into the garden behind the ballroom, clutching the railing of the terrace as sobs racked her body. "How could he?" she whispered to the night. "How could he still hurt me like this?" Her tears blurred the stars above, her body shaking with the weight of humiliation. She pressed both hands to her stomach, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, little one. I'm so sorry." Inside, the gala buzzed with scandal. Daniel's laughter echoed from the stage, triumphant, cruel. Serena clung to his arm, feeding off his arrogance. To the guests, it seemed as if Emily had been defeated. Her story ended before it could begin. But in the shadows of the terrace, something stirred. Footsteps approached, calm, deliberate, purposeful. Emily wiped her tears quickly, trying to compose herself. She didn't want anyone to see her broken. But when she turned, she froze. Alexander stood there, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. For a moment, Emily feared judgment in his eyes too. But what she saw instead was something far more powerful. Resolve. He stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "You think he's destroyed you tonight. But Emily, he's just destroyed himself." Emily blinked, her tears pausing. His words carried weight, certainty, the kind she had long forgotten. But doubt still gnawed at her heart. "Everyone believed him," she whispered. "They think I cheated. They think I trapped you. They think—" Her voice broke. "They think I'm worthless." Alexander's hand cupped her cheek gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Let them think what they want, for now, because tomorrow they'll know the truth. And when they do, Daniel Crawford will never recover." His words lit a spark in her chest, fragile but real. For the first time that night, Emily felt the possibility of strength returning. The collapse wasn't the end, it was the pause before the rise. And then Alexander pulled something from his jacket pocket, a folder, thick with documents. His eyes burned with quiet fire as he placed it in her trembling hands. "It's time they all saw what I've been holding back. Time to end this, once and for all." The folder felt heavy in Emily's hands, though it couldn't have weighed more than a pound. It wasn't the paper, it was what it represented. Proof. Power. Vindication. She looked up at Alexander, her eyes still wet from tears. "What is this?" she whispered. His gaze was steady, unwavering. "The end of his lies," he said simply. Emily's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Inside were documents, photographs, medical reports, and transcripts of conversations she never knew had been recorded. Her breath caught as she skimmed the pages. Each piece of paper was a weapon, evidence of Daniel's betrayal, his cruelty, his manipulations. Alexander stepped closer, his voice calm but burning with conviction. I've been watching, Emily, not in the way he made it sound, as if you were weak or broken, but because I knew something was wrong. Daniel Crawford has been lying for years, not just to you, but to everyone. I made it my business to know the truth. And now it's time everyone else knows too. Emily's throat tightened. For so long, Daniel had painted her as barren, worthless. Yet here in her hands were medical records, signed by specialists, proving she had no fertility issues. It hadn't been her. It had never been her. The reports revealed what Daniel had hidden. He was the one with the infertility diagnosis, something he had known all along but refused to admit. Tears welled again, but this time they weren't from shame. They were from relief, from the release of years of self-blame. She pressed a hand to her mouth, her voice breaking. All this time, it wasn't me. Alexander's hand rested gently on her shoulder. No, it was never you. He projected his failures onto you because he couldn't face the truth himself. And tonight, we end his story. Emily stared at the folder, her heart pounding. Could she do it? Could she walk back into that ballroom, still buzzing with gossip and Daniel's lies in front of everyone? Fear coiled in her chest, but beneath it, something else stirred. Strength. She thought of her child, the life growing inside her. She thought of every night she had cried herself to sleep, believing she was broken. She thought of Daniel's smirk, Serena's cruelty, the whispers of the crowd, and suddenly the fear burned away, replaced by fire. She closed the folder and straightened her shoulders. Let's end it. Alexander's lips curved into the faintest smile, proud and certain. He offered his arm, and together they turned back toward the glowing doors of the ballroom. Inside, Daniel was still basking in his supposed victory. Glass raised, Serena clinging desperately to his side. The crowd buzzed with scandal, their eyes darting between gossip and judgment. But the moment the doors opened again, all chatter ceased. Emily walked in, her head high, her hand on Alexander's arm, the folder clutched firmly in her other hand. Her gown shimmered under the chandeliers, her tears replaced by determination. This was not the same woman who had fled moments ago. The crowd parted as she made her way toward the stage. Whispers rose, confused, unsettled. She's back? What is she holding? Why does she look so calm? Daniel's smirk faltered. You've got some nerve coming back, he sneered. What? Here to cry some more? The show's over, Emily. But Emily didn't flinch. She stepped up to the microphone, her hands steady, her voice clear. No, Daniel. The show is just beginning. Gasps rippled through the audience. Serena's hand tightened on Daniel's arm, her face paling. Emily opened the folder, holding up the first document. For years, you told everyone I was barren. You told them I couldn't give you children, that I was broken, less than a woman. You mocked me, humiliated me, and used those lies to justify your betrayal. But here, she lifted the paper higher, is the truth. The crowd leaned forward, hungry, captivated. This is a medical report. Tondrat, Emily continued, her voice trembling only slightly. It states that I am healthy, that I have no infertility issues. It proves what I always suspected but never dared to believe, that the problem was never me. The room erupted in murmurs, sharp and scandalous. Eyes swung to Daniel, who stood frozen, his face draining of color. And here, Emily said, pulling another paper from the folder, is the report you tried to bury. Your report, Daniel, the one that proves you were the reason we couldn't have children. You knew, and instead of facing the truth, you blamed me. You let me suffer. You let me believe I was broken. Gasps turned to outrage. Guests shook their heads in disbelief, some even muttering curses under their breath. Daniel lunged forward, his voice shaking with fury. Lies! All of it, fabricated. But Alexander stepped to the microphone, his deep voice cutting through the chaos. These reports are verified. I had them authenticated by independent specialists. Daniel Crawford's deceit is over. The room erupted. Cameras flashed. Journalists scribbled furiously. Guests whispered with wide eyes. Daniel staggered back, his hands trembling, sweat beading on his forehead. Serena looked horrified, her grip on him faltering. Emily's gaze never left him. Her voice, calm but sharp, sliced through the noise. You tried to destroy me, Daniel. You humiliated me. But tonight, the truth destroyed you. The silence that followed was crushing, broken only by the relentless clicks of cameras. Daniel's mouth opened and closed, desperate for a rebuttal, but there was none left. His lies had collapsed, exposed in front of the very people whose respect he craved most. For Emily, The moment was surreal. The shame that had weighed on her for years lifted, replaced by a clarity so bright it almost blinded her. She wasn't broken. She never had been. Her hand brushed her belly, her voice soft but audible. "And soon I will become what you swore I could never be, a mother. Not because of you, Daniel, but in spite of you." The crowd erupted in applause, cheers breaking out across the ballroom. For the first time that evening, Emily wasn't pitied. She was admired. Daniel's face twisted in rage, his composure shattering. He turned to Serena, but even she looked at him with doubt, her eyes filled with fear. His empire of lies was crumbling, and he had no one left to hold it together. Emily lowered the papers, her heart steady, her resolve unshakable. The truth was out. The tide had turned. But just as she stepped back from the microphone, a sudden shout rang out from the edge of the crowd. "That's not the only secret Daniel Crawford has been hiding." The ballroom froze, every head turning toward the voice that promised an even deeper scandal. The shocking voice from the back of the ballroom had left the crowd buzzing, but Emily barely heard it. The documents in her hands, the truth now laid bare, had already shifted her entire world. The humiliation, the shame, the tears she had spilled for years, gone. What remained was fire. For the first time since her marriage to Daniel began, she felt weightless. It wasn't just vindication, it was freedom. Freedom from his lies, his cruelty, his suffocating grip on her identity. She was no longer the discarded wife defined by his betrayal. She was Emily Crawford, soon to be mother, survivor, and now warrior. But transformation is not simply declared, it is forged. That night, after the chaos of the gala, Emily retreated with Alexander. They slipped past flashing cameras and reporters shouting questions, their hands clasped tightly. She expected him to speak, to comfort her. But instead he offered silence, the kind of silence that let her think, breathe, and begin to rebuild. In his penthouse overlooking the city, Emily stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below, the streets pulsed with life. She thought of the girl she once was, the shy literature student in a thrifted dress, the young wife who believed love was enough, the woman who cried herself to sleep believing she was broken. That woman had died tonight in the ballroom, and from her ashes someone new was being born. Alexander finally broke the silence. "You have a choice now. You can disappear, live quietly with your child, and let the world forget tonight. Or," he paused, his eyes burning into hers, "you can rise. You can take back everything Daniel tried to steal from you. Dignity, power, respect, and you can make sure he never hurts anyone else again." Emily turned from the window, her reflection merging with the city lights. She saw not weakness, but potential. Her lips curved into a small, determined smile. "I don't want to disappear. I want to rise." Alexander nodded as if he had expected nothing less. "Then we begin tomorrow." And so the transformation began. The days that followed were unlike any Emily had known. Alexander surrounded her with a team, stylists, advisors, even a public relations expert. At first she resisted. "I don't need a makeover to prove my worth," she argued. But Alexander shook his head. "This isn't about vanity. It's about image. Daniel destroyed yours. We'll rebuild it stronger than ever. People believe what they see, Emily, and they will see your strength before they even hear your voice." Reluctantly, she agreed. And soon the process became more than superficial. It was cathartic. Her wardrobe shifted from timid pastels to bold, commanding colors. Her posture straightened, her gaze sharpened. Makeup didn't mask her pain, it highlighted her resilience. Every brushstroke, every tailored gown, every pair of heels was a declaration. She was not broken. But the transformation wasn't only external. Alexander encouraged her to speak with counselors, to confront the wounds Daniel had left behind. At first, Emily resisted. She had grown so used to burying her pain. But slowly she opened up. She spoke of the nights she felt invisible, of the cruelty she endured, of the lies she believed about herself. And in speaking them aloud, she stripped them of their power. One evening, weeks later, Emily sat in front of a mirror. Her hair framed her face in soft waves, her gown shimmered like liquid gold, and her eyes, once dull with sorrow, now burned with quiet strength. She hardly recognized herself. Alexander stepped behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You see it now, don't you?" he asked softly. Emily nodded. "I do. For so long I thought he defined me. But he doesn't. Not anymore. I define me." Alexander's smile was rare, but when it came, it was genuine. And soon, the world will see the same. Emily's transformation wasn't just physical or emotional, it was strategic. With Alexander's guidance, she began attending events again. Charity fundraisers, literary panels, community gatherings. At first, whispers followed her. That's Daniel Crawford's ex-wife. Is she really pregnant? Do you think the scandal is true? But as Emily spoke about education, about resilience, about hope, the whispers changed. People leaned in, captivated. They saw not a woman shamed by betrayal, but a figure of strength. Reporters began writing new headlines. Emily Crawford, rising from the scandal. From broken to bold, Emily's new chapter. Daniel's name, once attached to hers like a chain, now became a shadow she stepped over. But Daniel wasn't silent. He raged. Every newspaper article that praised Emily, every photo of her alongside Alexander, every headline that hinted at his downfall drove him deeper into fury. Serena, once proud at his side, now grew uneasy. The man she clung to was unraveling, his empire shaking. She had joined him for security, but security was slipping fast. Emily watched it all with calm determination. She no longer trembled at his outbursts. Instead, she prepared. Because transformation was not the end goal. It was the preparation for justice. One evening, as she sat with Alexander, she placed a hand on her stomach and whispered, "I don't want my child to grow up in a world where men like Daniel can destroy women without consequence. I want to end this. Not just for me, but for every woman who's ever been told she's less." Alexander's eyes softened, his voice low but resolute. "Then we end it. Not with whispers, not with secrets, but with a reckoning so public, so undeniable, that Daniel Crawford can never escape it." Emily's heart pounded. The idea terrified her, but it thrilled her too. She imagined walking into another grand hall, not as a broken ex-wife, but as a woman who had risen above betrayal. She imagined Daniel's face when he realized the power he once wielded over her was gone forever. For weeks, plans were laid, evidence was gathered, allies were secured. Alexander pulled strings Emily didn't know existed, opening doors into circles of influence even Daniel had never touched. The stage was being set, not just for revenge, but for justice. And Emily, once silenced by shame, was now preparing to speak louder than ever before. The night before the next gala, the night her reckoning would unfold, Emily stood before the mirror again. But this time she didn't just see resilience. She saw power. She touched her belly gently and whispered, "We're ready." She turned to Alexander, who stood waiting by the door, and nodded. Tomorrow, the world would no longer see her as Daniel Crawford's broken ex-wife. Tomorrow, they would see her as the woman who destroyed him. The Imperial Hotel shimmered again under crystal chandeliers. Weeks had passed since the disastrous Unity Gala, yet the air buzzed with even greater anticipation tonight. Invitations had been whispered about in hushed tones, rumored to come directly from Alexander Grant himself. Only the most influential were here. Investors, journalists, politicians, socialites. Everyone knew this night would not be ordinary. Emily stood behind the velvet curtains, her palms pressed against the silk fabric of her gown. It was unlike anything she had ever worn. Sleek, powerful, black, with a golden shimmer that caught the light like fire. Her posture was perfect, her eyes clear. She was no longer the woman who had fled the ballroom in tears. She was reborn. Alexander stood beside her, calm as always, his presence steady. "They're waiting," he said softly. Emily inhaled deeply, her hand brushing her stomach. The child inside her shifted, almost as if reminding her why she was here. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, about reclaiming dignity. She nodded. "Let's end it." The curtains parted. Gasps rippled through the audience as Emily stepped onto the stage. Flashbulbs erupted, the sound of cameras clicking filling the hall. She looked radiant, commanding, untouchable. Reporters whispered, guests leaned forward, everyone desperate to see what would unfold. Daniel was already there, invited under the guise of a business announcement. He wore his smug smile, Serena clinging to his arm. But when he saw Emily, his face twisted with shock. He hadn't expected her. Not like this. Emily walked with measured steps to the microphone. She paused, letting the silence swell, letting the audience absorb her transformation. Then, with a steady voice, she began. "Several weeks ago, I was humiliated in this very ballroom. Lies were spoken into microphones, whispered into ears, splashed across headlines, lies meant to break me. Tonight, I am not here to cry. I am not here to beg. I am here to tell the truth. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his smirk faltering. Serena's grip on his arm tightened. Emily lifted a folder. The same one Alexander had given her in the garden that night. She held it high for everyone to see. Here are the reports proving what Daniel Crawford hid for years. He blamed me for his failures. He called me barren. He told you all I was less than a woman. But the truth is, Daniel was the one who could not father children. Gasps filled the room. Journalists scribbled furiously, cameras flashing nonstop. Daniel's face burned red, his jaw tightening. Emily continued, her voice rising with conviction. For years I believed his lies. I carried his shame as if it were mine, but no more. Tonight I stand before you pregnant, not because of him, but in spite of him. I am not broken. I am whole. And I will never again let a man define my worth. The room erupted into applause, cheers echoing through the hall. Some guests even stood, clapping fiercely, their admiration clear. Daniel lunged forward, shouting over the noise. This is a setup. She's using Alexander's money to fabricate lies. None of this is real. Alexander stepped forward then, his calm demeanor cutting through Daniel's chaos. Every document has been authenticated by independent experts. Your empire of lies is finished, Crawford. The crowd turned on Daniel instantly. Investors whispered, their eyes sharp with betrayal. Politicians shook their heads, distancing themselves. Even Serena's grip on his arm loosened, her eyes darting nervously. Emily's gaze locked on Serena. Her voice softened, but it cut sharper than any blade. And you, Serena, you mocked me. You laughed when he called me barren. You enjoyed every piece of my pain. But tell me, how does it feel now, to stand beside a man exposed as a liar, a coward, and a fraud? Serena's face paled, her lips parting with no words to defend herself. She looked around the room, desperate for support, but found only judgment. Slowly she stepped away from Daniel, her heels clicking softly against the marble as she put distance between them. The crowd roared with whispers. She's leaving him. Even his mistress is abandoning him. Daniel's fury exploded. You think you've won? He shouted, his voice cracking. This isn't over, Emily. You'll regret this. But his threat sounded weak, desperate. The power had shifted completely. Emily didn't flinch. She stepped closer to the microphone, her voice calm but commanding. No, Daniel, this is over. You tried to erase me. You tried to bury me with lies. But you forgot one thing. Truth always rises, and so do I. The applause was deafening now, a standing ovation. Reporters pushed forward, desperate for every word, every image. Emily stood tall, soaking in the moment, not for vanity but for victory, for justice. Daniel's empire crumbled in real time. Investors walked out. Journalists cornered him with questions he couldn't answer. Serena disappeared into the crowd, abandoning him completely. The man who had once controlled Emily with fear now stood alone, sweating, cornered, despised. Emily turned from the microphone, Alexander's hand steady on hers. Her heart pounded, but not with fear, with triumph. She had reclaimed her voice, her dignity, her power. Yet even in the thunder of applause, she knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. Tonight had destroyed Daniel's lies, but tomorrow had to bring something greater. Something that would ensure her story wasn't just about revenge, but about hope. As she left the stage, the cameras flashing endlessly, Alexander leaned close and whispered, "You've won the crowd. Now, it's time to win the world." Emily's lips curved into a determined smile. She knew what had to come next. Because this wasn't just about destroying Daniel Crawford. It was about inspiring every woman who had ever been silenced, shamed, or broken, and showing them they could rise too. The storm had passed, but the echoes of its thunder still rolled across the city. The gala had ended with Daniel's empire crumbling in front of flashing cameras and thousands of eyes. The morning after, newspapers splashed with headlines told the story not of his victory, but of his downfall. Daniel Crawford exposed, truth revealed at Imperial Hotel. Emily Crawford's triumphant return, the woman who rose from betrayal. For once, Emily's name was no longer tied to humiliation. It was tied to strength. She sat in Alexander's penthouse, a cup of tea warming her hands as she read the papers. Each headline made her chest ache, not with pain, but with release. She had feared these same reporters for years, but now they told her story as it should have been told. Across the room, Alexander watched her quietly. "How does it feel?" he asked. Emily smiled softly, setting the paper down. "Like breathing fresh air after being trapped underwater. For years I thought I was drowning. Now I finally feel free." Alexander nodded, but his gaze was steady. "Freedom is just the beginning. What do you want to do with it?" Emily looked out at the city skyline, golden with morning light. She thought of all the women who had whispered their stories to her in confidence, women silenced by shame, convinced their worth had been stolen. She thought of the daughter she hoped to raise, the life she carried within her. Slowly, her lips curved into a determined smile. "I want to make sure no one else feels what I felt," she said firmly. "I want to use my voice, not just for me, but for them." And so her next chapter began. In the weeks that followed, Emily launched the Rise Foundation, dedicated to supporting women rebuilding their lives after betrayal, abuse, or humiliation. With Alexander's resources and her own newfound strength, the foundation quickly gained momentum. Newspapers that once printed Daniel's lies now ran stories about Emily's mission. Talk shows invited her to speak, magazines put her on their covers, not as Daniel Crawford's ex-wife, but as Emily Crawford, survivor, mother, leader. Her transformation captured hearts. Women wrote letters, sharing how her courage had inspired them to leave toxic marriages, to speak their truths, to demand respect. Emily read each one with tears in her eyes, her heart swelling with purpose. Meanwhile, Daniel's world collapsed further. Investors pulled out, lawsuits mounted. Serena abandoned him completely, leaving him to drown in the ruin he had created. For years, he had strutted like a king. Now he wandered like a ghost, stripped of power, exposed as a fraud. His downfall was swift, public, and irreversible. Emily never sought him out again. She didn't need to. His defeat was written in every headline, every closed door, every whispered insult he received. Justice had already been served, not through vengeance, but through truth. Yet Emily's greatest victory wasn't Daniel's ruin, it was her rebirth. One evening, months later, Emily stood again in front of a mirror. But this time, she wasn't in a gown or preparing for battle. She wore a simple dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, her hand resting gently on her round belly. She smiled at her reflection, at the life she carried, at the woman she had become. Behind her, Alexander entered quietly, his eyes softening at the sight. "You're glowing," he said, his voice filled with warmth. Emily laughed lightly. "I never believed people when they said that, but now," she touched her stomach, her eyes shining. "Now I feel it." Alexander stepped closer, placing a hand over hers. "You've given the world hope, Emily, but more than that, you've given yourself hope. That's the real miracle." She turned to face him, her heart swelling with gratitude. For his strength, his faith in her, his presence when she had nearly collapsed. But most of all, for reminding her that she was never broken. As the months passed, Emily embraced her new role fully. She became a mother, her daughter arriving with the cry of new beginnings. Holding the tiny life in her arms, Emily wept, not with sorrow, but with joy so fierce it shook her. She whispered to her child, "You are proof that nothing Daniel said was true. You are proof that I was always enough." Her foundation flourished, her daughter thrived, and her story became a symbol. She was invited to speak on stages to share her journey. Her words resonated deeply. Women are not defined by the men who betray them. We are not broken because someone tried to break us. We rise. Always we rise. The applause that followed wasn't just for Emily, it was for every woman who saw herself in her story, every heart that beat stronger because she had dared to tell the truth. Years later, when Emily looked back on the night of the Unity Gala, she no longer felt pain. Instead, she felt gratitude. Because without that night, without the humiliation and collapse, she might never have discovered her true strength. She might never have risen. Daniel's name faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered only in circles that no longer mattered. But Emily's name lived on, attached not to scandal, but to courage, hope, and triumph. On a quiet evening as the sun set over the city, Emily sat with her daughter on her lap, Alexander at her side. Her daughter's tiny hands tugged at her necklace, her laughter filling the air. Emily closed her eyes and breathed deeply, her heart at peace. She had been betrayed, humiliated, broken, but she had risen. And in rising, she had found more than justice. She had found herself. Her story was no longer one of shame. It was a story of victory. A story that reminded the world, and every woman who needed to hear it, that betrayal is not the end, it is the beginning of something stronger. Because when the ashes settle, the truth remains. and from that truth, we rise. All right, my friend, so our story has come to an end. But if you're still here with me right now, it means something in Emily's journey touched your heart. Maybe you felt broken, humiliated, or betrayed before. Yet remember, like the Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Emily's story shows us that even in the darkest moments, truth and strength can rise. Pain is not the end, it's the beginning of becoming stronger, wiser, and more free. So let's take this lesson into our own lives. Never let someone else's cruelty define your worth. You are not broken. You are becoming. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs hope, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel, because together we rise.